I'd like to share a story with you, if I may. It's a story of a case that I was connected with recently. I will be withholding certain details, certain matters of anonymity, and protecting those involved. Human remains were found in woodland, approximately 2 miles outside of a residential area. Initial forensic investigation identified a number of blunt force trauma wounds to the head and to the face. Further investigation, through post-mortem processes, identified a number of wounds had been inflicted, probably with a cylindrical object, and that was the probable cause of death. In further investigation in the space, what we saw was that the death likely took place about 48 hours previously to the finding, and that it was unlikely that it happened where the remains had been found, i.e. it was a deposition site, not the site of the actual murder. Thankfully, through police activity, it was possible for the person to be identified quickly. Subsequent interviews with family members and those who knew the deceased able to identify the fact that there had been an ongoing conflict. There had been a conflict between the deceased and their housemate that they shared an address with. Understandably, one of the next stages of the police investigation was to go to that address, to that shared address. On entering, the housemate wasn't to be seen. However, it was clear that there'd been some form of altercation. There's furniture upended, items disarrayed. And we're not just talking the usual mess of a residential site that we may have all seen, but instead something more. So the housemate not being there, very quickly tracked down. They tracked down there to a family member's house nearby. And so off they went, formally arresting and to be able to interview the housemate that was fast becoming the suspect. Now, as in many cases where there is an investigation into homicide, into death, lots of no-comment interviews with the starting point. No comment, no comment. Then through an ongoing discussion with the representation, the suspect then started to make a number of admissions. They acknowledged the fact that there had been a growing conflict between the housemate and the deceased. They said, no, this has been happening for quite some time, and that, in fact, they had struck the deceased in their shared address. On the strike, the person had fallen down and unfortunately was clearly dead. Unsurprisingly, the suspect and the housemate panicked at this stage and decided that clearly the answer was to move the remains from the shared address to the local woodland. Now, they knew this woodland. They took them in their own car and they placed them there, thinking it was very quiet. Not many people went there. So they argued, the suspect had argued that this was in self-defence. And they'd done this because they feared for their safety. So further investigations unsurprisingly happened. Lots more was discussed. They decided to flee to their family member's house after disposing of the body, and said, the housemate's leaving. We've had too big an argument, we're leaving. And need to give them time to be able to move out. Can I stay here for a couple of days? And that was, in fact, where the police eventually found the housemate, the suspect. So they go through the whole investigation process as you'd expect. Lots more is uncovered. And it ends with a charge and indictment for murder against the housemate. Now, if any of you know the legal system and the court trial process and how long it can take in this country, what happened was between the point of the indictment and the point of trial mentoring start, there was negotiation between the defence and the prosecution, various representatives. And an agreement to pleading guilty to a lesser charge or an alternative charge of manslaughter was agreed. They were duly sentenced. The facts of this case are not unusual. You will see multiple examples all over of conflict escalating into violence, even fatal violence. This is not unusual or not unheard of. However, I made it all up. It's completely fictional. What I've just told you was an expansion of the background background of a whodunit that I actually ran at the university in collaboration with some amazing colleagues in my faculty, in which we had a true crime podcaster murdered on site, and it was the background case as to why they were murdered. I would like to reassure everyone that everyone involved in the whodunit is still alive, and everyone is still with us. So yes, but the facts of the case, that account and many others, reflect reasonably held beliefs in the criminal justice system. What we as members of the public and those who consume accounts around crime and justice and all those sorts of things would readily accept those facts of that case. So what I'm suggesting is that maybe, just maybe, those long-held beliefs, those long-held suggestions of what we know, because we definitely know, we definitely understand, are an interesting part. And that is what we go forward through with the idea of this consuming such accounts. I'm going to take you a step back now. So there is a connection, I promise. My mum said I was born with a book in my hands. I was sworn blind I was. And I think she may have been right. What some of my fondest, earliest memories were actually being in bed with my sisters and having stories read to us just before going to sleep. Usual stories that you'd expect. And in fact, it's a habit I've kept to today. I have to read a couple of pages before going to sleep, settled in bed, ready to go to some different place, whether fictional or factual. It completely doesn't matter. I'll read any, to be honest. These stories are so important to me. Those memories are absolutely a fundamental part of who I am. And my life's journey would not have been complete without those stories. Indeed, they have fed into my professional life. I chose, after being in a courtroom when I was younger, I would like to point out, as a guest on a school trip, just want to make that super clear, I was in the courtroom and we had this trial and it was fantastic, and the theatre of the courtroom, very much like this actually in terms of space. We had this fantastic experience and it made me fascinated by crime and justice and law and the experiences and all these sort of things. And so I decided to study law and undertake practice qualifications in law because I was fascinated by it. And anyone who knows me knows I just kind of love the sound of my own voice a little bit. So, I found a home in law. So much of my teaching now, much of what I do, is about sharing stories, listening to stories, hearing people's experiences. I think there's nothing stronger in life than hearing people's accounts, understanding, listening, trying to appreciate from their point of view. I think it has to be at the core of the human experience. And so what we see is this idea that I went forward, as I say, writing these whodunits, teaching in various different ways, looking at all sorts of different things. When our students join us in first year, we talk about their crime story habits. I have a distinct crime story habit, I won't lie. I do read, watch, even write to a certain extent in whodunits. And I ask them, I say, how do you engage? And most of them will have done. It's virtually impossible to not engage with crime stories in some way, shape or form in the contemporary realm. They're everywhere. They're even in kids' cartoons. It is literally everywhere. It is virtually impossible to avoid. So, why is it that they're interested? Well, they want to learn. They want to learn about the world around them. And as one colleague recently said to me, does falling asleep to true crime podcasts make me a psychopath? And I said, probably not a psychopath, maybe a little bit morbidly curious, but, not a psychopath. I think we're okay on that score. I see my role as engaging and connecting with these crime stories and encouraging others to do the same, but just through a bit of a different lens. So my crux of my teaching, much of my writing, nights spent on the sofa with my lovely husband Ian, who is asking me whether the crime story we're watching is accurate or not, and watching me get slowly and slowly more annoyed at the fact that it's not remotely accurate, no, even the true crime ones, and trying to work on it together. But it all comes around this concept of the mythology of crime stories. And it is absolutely at the heart. It's why we're interested. And by crime stories, I should say, I mean factual or fiction. They're depictions of victimisation, perpetration, harm, crime. So a whole range. And those factual ones, obviously, we often refer to, culturally speaking, as true crime. And that is what I want to talk to you about today. That's what I want to challenge with you today, is this concept of true crime. And I think it's because we enjoy them and we engage with them. We think it's important to actually consider the fact that these are real experiences. These are people speaking from the heart about what they've experienced. It's their version of their perspective of what they're doing. Indeed, I work on case review work with students within a phenomenal external organisation. For those who are currently serving a custodial sentence saying, I did not do this. I am sitting here convicted of an offence I did not commit. Their stories were not accepted in the criminal justice processes they were subject to. And now they're saying, this is not me. The safety of their conviction is being challenged. So, what is my challenge for true crime? My students, if any of you are in here, will have heard a much longer version of this discussion over the years of me teaching. And it's fundamentally with the language, true, truth. Now, wouldn't it be lovely if we could think that all these wonderful investigations, and there are phenomenal practitioners out there, amazing practitioners who do amazing work and investigating, and people who can come forward with detailed accounts and all the rest of it. Wouldn't it be lovely if there was a single version of truth in any given case? That we just know. Wouldn't that be nice and convenient in terms of investigations? Well, let's face it, that's never going to happen. It is not possible. And indeed, in that work that I do with the students, it is about talking about those exact areas. Now, I have read, I have listened, I have watched endless versions of these accounts of true crime and crime fiction, so crime stories across the board. We know that we get the perspectives of prosecutors, of defence, of those who have harmed, those who are harmed, those who are experts, those who are judges, those who are jury members, those who are in the media, and a million other people besides, because everyone has their view on it. And so we see these accounts being given, and it's not that they're not true to them. They're not being misleading. Most of the time, they're not lying. And in fact, I would vehemently resist against any suggestion that they are. It is their story, their truth. And in any given case, there is always multiple. If any of you have ever sat in a criminal courtroom, hopefully not, but for whatever reason you may have done, there are two sides to that story, isn't there? It's prosecution and defence. We're adversarial in this country. And of course, there's only one version of prosecution and only one version of defence. All of those different things. There are so many stories happening in that one room. And it's about making sense of those stories. And they can base, those accounts, those stories, are based on personal experience, professional experience, expert knowledge. So when considering when these stories are created by a third or party or an outsider party, then what we're really seeing is the generation of the story one step removed from that truth. There are phenomenal writers and producers of crime stories, absolutely unquestionably. That I've read and listened to watch to many of them. And they campaign, they challenge, they say no, we shouldn't be hearing this. And also hold that mirror up to our own blemishes, maybe a little bit. The misjudgment, the misinformation, the victim blaming, perpetration as only a form of evil, judgment, full conviction, wrongful conviction. All of these things I get to teach about. So there are some amazing writers, the likes of Hallie Rubenhold, Lucy Worsley, Kate Summerscale, Blessing Adams, have all taken historical cases, taken them through contemporary eyes and said, no, we got this wrong. Have a look at the actual evidence we have. What are we saying? And they write extensively and on extensive research. Much true crime is created for entertainment, as you'd expect. It is a 30-minute podcast, it's a 40-minute episode, it's a film. And they are written in a way that gives us shortcuts to understanding for the audience. You don't want to be traipsing through the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, Code D, when you're trying to get to the heart of the processes that we're undertaking. In my case review work, very important. But we have these shortcuts because they are commonly held beliefs, facts that we just know, okay? Unfortunately, often based on cultural and social inappropriate inappropriate stereotypes, biases, etc. In fact, our consumption of true crime so recently has, in fact, led to a number of people thinking they can solve real crimes. In fact, attending things like scenes of crime and doing deep dive interviews and going into the internet research. Because do you know what? It's really obvious who the perpetrator is. We know because we have seen it 100 times before. We know. It's obvious, except it's not. And it usually isn't. Those social media theories are extremely powerful, highly misleading, and really deeply unhelpful a lot of the time, especially when you start messing around on actual crime scenes. There is research conducted that says we engage with true crime for self-preservation, protection. If we know the risks, we know the challenges, we know the opportunities, then we can protect ourselves. Also, if we have been harmed ourselves, we might seek stories that reflect our harm, so we can understand the impact, so we can reach out and connect with others. Whether it is useful, whether it is helpful, different conversation, but it's there. It's about a reflective mirror on our own harmful experiences. So what should we call true crime if not true crime? The accounts, when personal, are the truth of the person speaking. It is the victim survivor, it is the perpetrator, it is the expert. It is the person who is standing in front of you saying, this is my story. When it's a third person, an outsider account, then really what we're looking at is our interpretation as consumers. Why are they telling us this story? Whose perspective are they giving us? How much do they really know? And so when we do this, when we do look at this, I suspect that what we need to be doing is challenging those representations. Saying, okay, this is what we're seeing, but why? The why, the how, the what, the when. Attempting to understand their experiences. We pay the greatest respect to those involved when we challenge, when we ask the difficult questions, when we say no to the processes in front of us that we don't agree with in criminal justice terms. And in fact, what we do is we learn, we challenge, we explore when we consider whose truth the true crime story is. Thank you.